They laughed at his old uniform in court. Until the judge heard his name and fired the prosecutor. The air in the courtroom hung heavy with an almost palpable tension, yet it was a tension steeped in a peculiar form of entertainment for those gathered. A stale, recycled chill from the inefficient air conditioning mingled with the faint scent of old paper and nervous sweat, creating an atmosphere that felt both oppressive and oddly detached. On one side stood Prosecutor Theron Vance, a man in the full flush of his youthful ambition, perhaps 35, his expensive, crisp suit tailored impeccably to his lean frame. His confidently gelled hair, sharp jawline, and the almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips radiated an aura of undeniable power, an almost predatory assurance. He was dissecting the frail figure before him with the surgical precision of a seasoned predator, his questions honed to a razor's edge, designed not just to extract information but to dismantle a reputation, to chip away at a man's very being. Yet, his praise seemed utterly oblivious, or perhaps, simply beyond caring, lost in a world only he could perceive. General Orion Maxwell, or rather, the man who appeared before them as just Orion Maxwell, sat slumped in his chair, his aged eyes seemingly unfocused, gazing into a distant void, seeing not the fluorescent lights of the courtroom but perhaps the vast, echoing landscapes of memory. His sparse white hair, more a wispy cloud than a neatly coiffed style, formed a wild halo around a face etched deeply by time, each line a testament to battles fought, decisions made, and losses endured. His attire, a faded, olive-drab field jacket, worn thin at the elbows and frayed at the cuffs, was the object of Vance's particular derision, a symbol, in the prosecutor's eyes, of a forgotten past and an irrelevant present, a desperate, pathetic cling to something long gone. "And you insist, Mr. Maxwell," Vance's voice was laced with a thinly veiled mockery, a practiced inflection that slid easily between feigned politeness and outright contempt, "that this garment, this old uniform as you so quaintly put it, was simply a matter of comfort. Not an attempt to mislead or, dare I say, garner undeserved sympathy." A ripple of laughter, quickly suppressed, spread through the public gallery. The sounds were a mixture of stifled chuckles and snide whispers, punctuated by the rustle of programs and the shifting of uncomfortable bodies. Even some of the court staff struggled to maintain their composure, a few furtive glances exchanged, a hand brought quickly to a mouth to hide an unbidden smile. The judge, an imposing figure named Eleanor Vance, no relation to Theron, though their shared surname often bred a subtle, unacknowledged bias in the minds of observers, merely tapped a pen impatiently against her wooden bench. Her gaze, usually sharp and penetrating, held a hint of weariness. She had heard enough of this trivial matter, these petty arguments about an old man's clothing. It seemed a waste of the court's precious time. Orion, however, seemed to find a spark in his dull gaze. A flicker of something akin to amusement, perhaps even a quiet triumph, ignited in the depths of his eyes. He shifted almost imperceptibly, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips, a subtle curve that the prosecutor, blinded by his own hubris and the intoxicating scent of an easy victory, entirely missed. "The game, young man," Orion rasped, his voice surprisingly clear for a moment, cutting through the courtroom's quiet hum, imbued with an unexpected strength that belied his frail appearance, "is almost over. And you seem to have entirely misunderstood the rules." Theron Vance merely scoffed, a dismissive sound that conveyed his utter disregard for the old man's words, turning to the judge with an exaggerated sigh of exasperation. "Your Honor, I believe the defendant's senility is becoming a distraction. His ramblings are irrelevant. May we please proceed with the sentencing?" The judge, her patience visibly thinning, nodded curtly, reaching for her gavel, entirely convinced that this was merely the confused ramblings of a senile old man, a burden to be efficiently dispatched. Little did they know, the game was indeed far from over, and the true rules, meticulously crafted and cunningly concealed, were about to be revealed with a devastating finality. General Orion Maxwell, at 85 years old, was a name that once resonated with the force of history itself. Decades prior, during a conflict that reshaped continents and redefined the very concept of global power, he had been the strategic brilliance behind critical victories, a four-star general whose integrity was as unyielding as his tactical genius. His mind, a complex web of logistical mastery and psychological insight, had outmaneuvered foes on countless occasions, earning him a place in the annals of military history. His portrait hung in hallowed halls, from the Pentagon's quiet corridors to the hushed galleries of the National Museum, his name etched in monuments of polished granite and gleaming bronze, a testament to a bygone era of unwavering principle and profound sacrifice. He had been a man of steel and conviction, revered not just for his intellect but for his unshakable moral compass. Yet, as the years stretched into a quiet twilight, as the digital age dawned and swept away the old ways, Orion found himself increasingly a stranger in the very world he had helped to secure. A deep, gnawing disillusionment had settled within him, a bitter residue left by a society that seemed to have forgotten its past, discarded its values like worn-out clothes, and, most painfully, abandoned its respect for those who had paid its freedom's price. He had watched, with a quiet agony that deepened with each passing year, as integrity became a quaint, almost laughable notion, replaced by superficiality and self-interest. News feeds, once sources of genuine discourse, now pulsed with celebrity gossip and fleeting trends. He saw politicians engage in blatant dishonesty, business leaders prioritize profit over people, and individuals chase fleeting fame rather than enduring character. Veterans, once revered as living embodiments of courage and sacrifice, were now often overlooked, dismissed as relics, or, worse, exploited by unscrupulous organizations. The very notion of character, of inner worth beyond outward appearance or material possessions, seemed to have evaporated into the digital ether, replaced by curated online personas and the endless pursuit of external validation. Orion yearned to understand if any genuine kindness, any unadulterated respect, still lingered beneath the polished veneers and cynical smiles of modern life. He refused to believe that humanity had entirely shed its skin of decency, that the core of goodness had completely atrophied, but the evidence accumulated daily, a heavy weight on his aging spirit, threatening to extinguish the last embers of his hope. It was this profound disillusionment, coupled with a growing, insatiable curiosity about the true nature of modern humanity, that had spurred him to embark on his peculiar experiment. He had observed for years, from the privileged perch of his isolated estate, a sprawling property nestled deep in the countryside, how people treated those they perceived as unimportant, the invisible members of society. He saw the way delivery drivers were ignored, janitors overlooked, the elderly dismissed. He decided to descend from his ivory tower, to shed the trappings of his illustrious past, to discard the very name that commanded respect, and to walk among them as one of the overlooked, one of the insignificant. He would become a mirror, he decided, reflecting humanity's true face back upon itself, a silent, living barometer of its soul. The fabricated public disturbance charge was not an accident, but rather a carefully orchestrated opportunity, a precise mechanism for his grand test. Orion had chosen a small, unassuming apartment in a working-class neighborhood, deliberately choosing to live simply, even shabbily, for several months before the incident. He frequented local establishments, the corner grocery, the tired laundromat, the bustling diner, always observing, always absorbing. He noticed the casual indifference, the fleeting moments of rushed politeness, the deep-seated weariness in the eyes of those around him. The charge itself was flimsy, almost comically so, initiated by a young, overzealous police officer eager to make an easy arrest and a disgruntled shop owner who had misinterpreted Orion's quiet contemplation of a display of cheap trinkets as suspicious loitering and potential theft. Orion, in his chosen guise of a disheveled old man, had offered no resistance, no explanation of his true identity, no hint of the power and influence he still commanded. He merely allowed the machinery of the justice system to grind forward, eager to see how it would treat someone perceived as utterly insignificant, a mere statistic to be processed. The old uniform was a deliberate touch, a sentimental nod to his past, yes, a comfort in its familiar weight, but also a crucial component of the test. It was his old field jacket from his active service days, faded and worn, but still recognizably military in style, still bearing the faint imprint of where his four-star general's insignia had once been proudly affixed. Would anyone, he wondered, recognize the quiet dignity it once represented, the immense sacrifice it embodied, or would it simply be another mark of his perceived decrepitude, a sign of his being out of touch, a sign of his irrelevance? He wanted to see if the world, when presented with the unassuming shell of a man, stripped of his accolades and titles, still possessed the capacity for empathy, for genuine, uncalculated human connection, for respect that wasn't earned by wealth or power. He was searching for a glimmer of light in what he increasingly perceived as an encroaching darkness, a darkness where only superficiality, self-interest, and the relentless pursuit of outward appearance seemed to thrive. The court case began, and Orion's plan was set into motion with chilling precision. His initial appearance was unremarkable, precisely as he intended. He shuffled into the courtroom, his shoulders slightly stooped, his gait uneven, his gaze seemingly lost somewhere in the distant past, or perhaps, simply staring blankly at the polished floor. He looked like any other indigent, confused old man who had stumbled into the unforgiving gears of the legal system. He was an easy target, a low-hanging fruit, a guaranteed notch on the belt for an ambitious young prosecutor like Theron Vance. From their very first interaction, even before the formal proceedings began, Vance's disdain was palpable, a thinly veiled contempt that he didn't even bother to hide, his eyes flicking over Orion with a dismissive air. "Mr. Maxwell," Vance had begun, his voice dripping with condescension during the initial pre-trial hearing, his tone carefully calibrated to sound concerned yet carry an underlying message of dismissal. "Do you have any family who can attest to your mental faculties? Perhaps a guardian who can assist you in understanding these proceedings?" Orion merely blinked slowly, his eyes seeming to clear for a fleeting moment, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his lips, a sign of hidden amusement. "I speak for myself, young man," he had rasped, his voice surprisingly firm, carrying an echo of past authority that Vance, absorbed in his own script, entirely missed. Vance had simply chuckled, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor, turning to the judge with an exaggerated roll of his eyes. "Your Honor, I believe we have a clear-cut case of an elderly individual suffering from delusion. The public disturbance was a nuisance, his behavior erratic. We recommend a swift resolution and perhaps placement in a facility where he can receive proper care." He made it sound like a benevolent act, a humanitarian concern, but the subtext was clear, screaming from every syllable, "Get this old man out of his hair, secure a quick, easy conviction, and move on to more prestigious cases, cases that would truly advance his career." Outside the courtroom, in the bustling corridors filled with the murmur of lawyers, the clack of hurried footsteps, and the ringing of phones, Vance often paraded his perceived triumph, boasting to his colleagues. He would lean against the cool marble walls, a confident smile plastered on his face, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard by those he wished to impress. "Another easy win," he would declare, gesturing vaguely towards the door where Orion had just shuffled out, a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Just some old geezer in a faded military jacket, probably thinks he's still fighting the good fight. Doesn't even have a lawyer. Barely coherent. The judge will sign off on this any minute." The other lawyers, most of them younger and just as eager to climb the ranks, would offer their own snide remarks, their performative sighs of sympathy for Vance's unfortunate task, their eyes betraying a shared sense of superiority. Some would nod in agreement, others would offer a knowing smirk, but no one, absolutely no one, in that environment offered Orion a second glance of genuine concern, let alone respect. He was an inconvenience, a statistic, a stepping stone on someone else's career ladder, a problem to be efficiently removed. Yet, amidst this landscape of indifference, a solitary figure emerged, a beacon of unexpected kindness. Her name was Evelyn Reed. She was a legal aid attorney, perpetually overworked and underpaid, her youthful face, though still bearing the fresh idealism of her early 20s, already showing the faint lines of strain from long hours, thankless battles, and the relentless pressure of a caseload too heavy for one person. Her clothes were functional, not fashionable, a worn blazer over a simple blouse, practical shoes that had seen too many miles, and her hair, a tangled mess of brown waves, was often hastily pulled back, betraying the frantic pace of her life. She had been assigned to Orion's case as a formality, despite his quiet, almost imperceptible refusal to accept counsel. The court system mandated it. But Evelyn, unlike her more cynical colleagues who saw only case numbers and metrics, saw not just a file, but a human being, a tired old man. She first approached him during a brief recess, while most of the other lawyers were either networking, attempting to impress potential partners, or grabbing expensive, artisanal coffees from the courthouse cafe. Orion sat alone on a worn wooden bench outside the courtroom, seemingly lost in thought, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance, oblivious to the bustling activity around him. "Mr. Maxwell." Evelyn's voice was soft, hesitant, yet laced with genuine concern, a stark contrast to the clipped, professional tones that usually filled the corridors. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I'm from Legal Aid. I just wanted to make sure you understood all the proceedings. Anne, would you like a glass of water?" She held out a plastic cup, condensation beading on its sides, cool and inviting. Orion looked up, his eyes, for a fleeting moment, sparkling with an intelligence that utterly contradicted his disheveled appearance, a sudden flash of keen observation. He took the water, his fingers, gnarled with age and thin with time, brushing hers gently. The touch was fleeting, yet Evelyn felt a peculiar jolt, a faint sense of something profound beneath the surface. "Thank you, young lady," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly deep. "It's refreshing." He took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving hers, as if assessing her very soul. Evelyn didn't press him about the case, didn't try to force legal advice on him, didn't bombard him with questions about his defense. She simply offered a quiet presence, an unspoken understanding. "It must be overwhelming," she offered gently, nodding towards the bustling courtroom doors, the cacophony within. "All this, for what seems like a misunderstanding." Her empathy was disarming, devoid of pity, brimming with genuine human connection. She saw the human behind the charges, the dignity beneath the worn jacket, the story in the lines on his face. She was battling her own financial struggles, her own crushing student loan debts, living in a cramped, studio apartment that barely contained her few possessions, yet she still offered kindness freely, without expectation of reward, without a hidden agenda. She even brought him a small, pre-packaged sandwich one day, noticing he hadn't eaten, his gaze vacant during the lunch break. "It's not much," she'd mumbled, a slight blush on her cheeks, embarrassed by the humble offering, "but I thought you might be hungry. Court days are long." Orion had accepted it with a quiet grace, his eyes lingering on her, a silent assessment taking place, a profound recognition blooming within him. He had found his glimmer, the beacon he had been seeking in the encroaching darkness. Back in court, Vance's mockery escalated, growing bolder with each passing day. He began to lean heavily on Orion's appearance, his age, his seemingly confused state, and, most frequently, his old uniform. "This man," Vance thundered, gesturing towards Orion with a dramatic sweep of his arm, his voice echoing with practiced indignation, "is a public nuisance, a relic of a bygone era who cannot adapt to modern society. He wanders the streets in this costume." He paused for effect, allowing a beat of silence to emphasize his derision, "disrupting peace, causing alarm. This uniform," he sneered, using exaggerated air quotes, his lip curling in contempt, "is nothing but a prop for a deluded mind trying to cling to a past that no longer exists. He is a burden on our public services, a drain on our community. He needs to be put away, for his own good, and for the good of the community." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing the chuckles and murmurs of agreement to ripple through the gallery, a wave of collective judgment. The judge, impatient with the theatrics but seemingly swayed by Vance's confident assertions and the apparent simplicity of the case, seemed ready to concur, her hand hovering near her gavel. The court's general reaction was a mixture of pity, amusement, and a collective agreement that this old man was indeed a burden, a problem to be neatly disposed of, a nuisance to be removed from the public eye. Orion, however, sat quietly, observing, his expression unreadable, a faint, knowing smile returning to his lips. The game was indeed reaching its climax. The final day of the trial dawned, heavy with the weight of expectation. Prosecutor Theron Vance, brimming with an almost arrogant certainty, the taste of victory already on his tongue, was prepared to deliver his closing arguments, to seal the fate of the old man in the faded military jacket. He saw it as a stepping stone, a clean, swift victory that would impress his superiors, solidify his reputation as a ruthless and efficient prosecutor, and propel his career forward into the echelons of power he so desperately craved. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal professionals, a phalanx of junior lawyers eager to learn from the master, but with a smattering of curious onlookers, drawn by the whispers of the old man case, eager to witness the dramatic conclusion of what seemed to them a trivial but amusing spectacle. Vance began his address with a flourish, his voice resonating with theatrical indignation, perfectly modulated for maximum impact. He painted a vivid, yet distorted, picture of Orion Maxwell as a senile, troublesome vagrant, a drain on public resources, and a minor but persistent threat to public order. He ridiculed Orion's quiet demeanor, his occasional pauses, interpreted as signs of confusion, and, of course, his attire. And what of this uniform? Vance scoffed, his gaze sweeping dismissively over Orion, lingering on the worn fabric with a look of utter contempt. This faded relic, worn by a man who clings to a fantasy of past glory, a desperate, pathetic attempt to evoke sympathy. It is nothing more than a desperate plea for attention, a symbol of a mind that has long since lost its grip on reality. We owe it to society to ensure such individuals are no longer a burden, no longer a source of disruption, no longer a drain on our resources. He concluded with a demand for the maximum possible penalty, a harsh sentence that would effectively remove Orion from the public sphere, consigning him to a facility or a quiet, isolated existence. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery, a mixture of agreement and morbid curiosity, a sense of collective satisfaction that a small problem was about to be solved. The judge, Eleanor Vance, seemed poised to deliver her verdict, her face set in a stern expression, her brow furrowed, clearly leaning towards the prosecutor's arguments, convinced by his confident delivery and the apparent simplicity of the facts. It was at this precise moment that Orion Maxwell, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, his gaze seemingly distant, slowly, deliberately, rose to his feet. His movements were not those of a frail old man, but of someone possessing an inner strength, a quiet authority, a deep-seated power that suddenly commanded every shred of attention in the room. The courtroom, which had been filled with a low hum of anticipation, fell silent, a subtle, almost spiritual shift in the atmosphere. Even Theron Vance, mid-smirk, faltered, his confident posture wavering, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Orion's gaze, once seemingly unfocused, now held a piercing intensity that seemed to penetrate every corner of the room, fixing on each person, drawing them into his orbit. He looked directly at Theron Vance, his eyes unblinking, then at the judge, and finally, at the hushed, expectant gallery, his presence radiating an undeniable power. "Young man," he addressed the prosecutor, his voice low, resonant, and devoid of any previous rasp or weakness, filled with an unexpected clarity, "you speak of burdens and disruptions. You speak of what is owed to society. But you seem to have forgotten one fundamental truth, a truth carved from the very fabric of our nation. Society owes a great deal to those who have truly served, those who have sacrificed, those who have upheld the very values you so readily dismiss and mock." Vance, momentarily stunned by the sudden change in Orion's demeanor and voice, started to interject, a nervous protest forming on his lips, but Orion's voice, gaining in power and volume with each word, cut him off decisively. "You mock this uniform," Orion continued, his hand lightly touching the faded fabric of his field jacket, the gesture imbued with a profound reverence. "You see it as a symbol of delusion, of a mind lost in the past. But I assure you, sir, this jacket has seen more truth, more honor, more genuine sacrifice, more blood and tears shed for the very freedoms you take for granted, than your entire, privileged life ever will. The judge, intrigued by the sudden, astonishing shift in Orion's demeanor, leaned forward, her initial weariness replaced by a flicker of genuine curiosity, a dawning realization that something profound was unfolding before her. "Mr. Maxwell," she interjected, her tone now laced with a newfound respect, a slight tremor in her voice, "who exactly are you, beyond the charges leveled against you?" Orion fixed his gaze on her, and for the first time in the entire trial, a full, almost challenging smile spread across his face, a smile that radiated quiet power and a deep, satisfied knowing. "Your Honor," he stated, his voice now clear, strong, and brimming with an undeniable authority that filled the silent courtroom, "my name is Orion Maxwell." The name hung in the air like a sudden clap of thunder, sharp and undeniable, shaking the very foundations of the courtroom. Judge Eleanor Vance's eyes widened, her posture stiffening, a gasp escaping her lips. She had heard that name before, of course, countless times. It was a name whispered with reverence in military circles, a name taught in history books, enshrined in the very bedrock of the nation's identity. But the man before her, the disheveled old man, the one they had dismissed as senile and irrelevant, could it truly be? Her mind raced, sifting through decades of history, of strategic brilliance, of unwavering leadership. Her eyes darted to the faded field jacket, and suddenly, she saw it not as a costume, not as a symbol of mental decay, but as a genuine piece of history, a relic worn by a living legend. She remembered a specific battle, a specific strategy, a particular quote from an old, venerated general that had shaped her own understanding of leadership and duty, a quote that had inspired her own brief service in the reserves. The name, General Orion Maxwell, was akin to a deity in her world, a figure of almost mythical stature. "General Orion Maxwell," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, a mix of disbelief, awe, and profound respect. The courtroom, which had been silent, now erupted in a frantic buzz, a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and frantic shuffles. People turned to each other, whispering, checking their phones, faces shifting from amusement to shock, from indifference to dawning horror as the truth permeated the room. Prosecutor Theron Vance, however, stood frozen, his face draining of all color, turning ashen. The realization dawned on him with the force of a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath and left him reeling. The old man he had so mercilessly ridiculed, that senile nuisance he had attempted to crush beneath his polished heel, was a living legend, a national hero, a man whose very name commanded respect and reverence from every corner of the country. His career, his future, his very reputation, hung by a thread, and that thread was about to snap with a devastating finality. Judge Vance, recovering quickly from her initial shock, brought her gavel down with a resounding crack that silenced the murmuring crowd, the sound echoing through the sudden void. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer merely stern, but infused with an unmistakable indignation, a blazing fury directed squarely at the now trembling prosecutor. "Mr. Vance," she declared, her eyes blazing with righteous anger, "you have just committed one of the most egregious acts of professional disrespect and negligence I have ever witnessed in this court. You have not only slandered a decorated war hero, a man who gave his life to this nation, but you have also demonstrated a shocking lack of due diligence, a profound ignorance of history, and a contemptible disregard for human dignity." She looked at Orion, her voice softening, her expression one of deep remorse. "General Maxwell, I offer my deepest apologies for the manner in which this court has treated you, for the indignity you have been forced to endure. The charges against you are hereby dismissed with prejudice." Then, her gaze hardened, turning back to a pale, trembling Theron Vance, who seemed to shrink under her scorching gaze. "And as for you, Mr. Vance," she continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, each word a precise, devastating blow, "I am recommending to the Bar Association that your license be immediately suspended pending a full investigation into your conduct, your professional ethics, and your complete failure to uphold the most basic tenets of this profession. You are dismissed from this courtroom, and from this case, effective immediately." And I assure you, your career as a prosecutor, at least in this state, is over." The words landed like hammer blows, each one echoing the profound reversal of fortune, shattering Theron Vance's world into a million pieces. Theron Vance, the ambitious predator, had become the utterly vanquished, his face a mask of horrified despair, his grand ambitions reduced to ashes. The judge's words were final, damning, and profoundly just. The aftermath of the reveal was immediate and devastating for prosecutor Theron Vance. He stood in the silent courtroom, utterly humiliated, his carefully constructed career collapsing around him like a house of cards in a gale-force wind. The judge's words, echoing like a death knell for his ambitions, were followed by a swift and brutal reality that he was entirely unprepared for. Within hours, news of the incident had spread like wildfire through the legal community, fueled by social media and the frantic whispers of those who had witnessed his spectacular downfall. The Bar Association moved with unprecedented speed, their response fueled by public outrage and the undeniable evidence of his misconduct. They initiated a full investigation that quickly unearthed not only his egregious conduct in Orion Maxwell's case but also a pattern of dismissive and arrogant behavior towards other perceived, insignificant individuals in his past cases, minor infractions, petty disputes, all handled with the same casual contempt for the less fortunate. His license was indeed suspended, a prelude to what would inevitably be a full disbarment. His name, once synonymous with a rising star, was now mud, a cautionary tale whispered in law schools and muttered in hushed tones in legal offices. Firms that had once clamored for his talent now recoiled, withdrawing offers, canceling meetings. His professional network, once so vast and influential, evaporated overnight, leaving him isolated and utterly alone. Theron Vance, the man who had mocked an old general for his uniform, who had ridiculed the very concept of integrity, found himself utterly stripped of his own. He was forced to move back in with his parents, his grand dreams shattered, his carefully cultivated image in ruins, facing a future devoid of the prestige and power he had so desperately craved. The irony was palpable, a bitter, twisted joke. He had sought to crush an old man for a fabricated charge, and in doing so, had utterly crushed his own life and reputation. For Evelyn Reed, however, the fallout was a miraculous, life-altering cascade of blessings, an unexpected tide that lifted her from the depths of struggle. As the courtroom erupted in a flurry of apologies and frantic attempts to curry favor with the newly revealed General Maxwell, Evelyn stood a little apart, her eyes wide with shock, not at the revelation of his identity, for that truth merely confirmed the quiet dignity she had already perceived, but at the sheer magnitude of the justice that had been served, the profound, almost biblical reversal of roles. Orion approached her, his steps deliberate, a genuine, warm smile replacing the knowing one he had worn throughout the trial. His gaze, now fully clear and imbued with a profound gratitude, fixed on her. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice soft, almost tender, "you were the only one who saw beyond the disguise. The only one who offered kindness without expectation, who saw a human being where others saw only a case file or a nuisance. That, young lady, is a rarer commodity than gold, more precious than any fleeting triumph in a courtroom." Evelyn, still reeling, her mind struggling to process the enormity of the moment, could only stammer, "General Maxwell. I just did what anyone should do. It was nothing remarkable." Orion chuckled softly, a deep, satisfied sound. "Perhaps what anyone should do, Miss Reed, but certainly not what everyone does." He then extended his hand, not for a shake, but to reveal a crisp, new business card, finely embossed with a simple, elegant logo. "This is the name of my family's private foundation. I have been watching you, Miss Reed, not just in this courtroom, but I took the liberty of observing your dedication in your previous cases, your tireless efforts for the underprivileged. Your dedication, your empathy, your unwavering advocacy for those who have no voice, no power, it is truly commendable. It is precisely what this world desperately needs." Evelyn's eyes widened, a fresh wave of tears welling as he continued, each word a revelation. "I believe in supporting true character, Miss Reed, not just fleeting talent or superficial charm. My foundation is prepared to offer you a full scholarship to pursue any further legal education you desire, to pay off every cent of your student debt, every burden that has weighed you down, and to provide substantial seed funding for you to establish your very own legal aid firm, one that truly serves the underserved, without the constraints of bureaucracy or the cynicism of the profit motive. You will have a state-of-the-art facility, a dedicated staff, and the resources to make a profound, lasting difference in this world. I ask only that you continue to be the good, principled, compassionate lawyer you already are. Evelyn was utterly speechless, tears now streaming freely down her face, tears of overwhelming relief and gratitude. The weight of years of struggle, of financial anxiety, of relentless, thankless work, suddenly lifted, dissolving into nothingness. She tried to refuse, overwhelmed by the sheer generosity, but Orion's gentle insistence was firm, his gaze unwavering. "It is not charity, Miss Reed," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "It is an investment in the future, an investment in the very values I sought to find, the very goodness I hoped still existed. It is a deserved reward for character, for compassion, for decency, for the unwavering light you carry within you." She accepted, utterly overcome with gratitude, her voice a choked whisper of thanks. The young, struggling lawyer who had offered a glass of water and a humble sandwich to a seemingly insignificant old man was now being granted the opportunity to fulfill her wildest dreams, to create a legacy of kindness and justice that would echo for generations. Months turned into a year, and life settled into its new, altered rhythm, a testament to the profound shifts initiated by Orion's audacious experiment. General Orion Maxwell returned to his quiet, contemplative life on his estate, no longer needing to disguise himself, for his experiment had yielded its profound, if bittersweet, results. He had found the glimmer of light he sought in Evelyn Reed, a living testament that true character, unburdened by superficiality, still existed in the modern world. He watched, from a comfortable distance, as Evelyn's new legal aid firm blossomed. It became a beacon of hope in the community, renowned not just for its legal victories but for its compassionate approach, its unwavering advocacy for those who truly needed it, a place where every person, regardless of their perceived status, was treated with dignity and respect. Evelyn, now free from the crushing weight of debt and armed with unprecedented resources, became a force for good, a living embodiment of the principle that genuine kindness, given freely, without expectation, can sow seeds of extraordinary, transformative change. She often thought of the old general, a quiet reverence in her heart for the man who had seen her for who she truly was, who had given her the chance to truly live her ideals. Theron Vance, on the other hand, was a ghost of his former self. Disbarred, shunned by the legal community, and ostracized by many of his former friends and acquaintances who now saw him as a liability, he struggled to find any meaningful work. His arrogance had curdled into a bitter resentment, a toxic brew of self-pity and anger, and he often found himself alone, reflecting on the day he had chosen to mock an old man's uniform, only to have his entire world unravel. The lesson he learned was harsh, unequivocal, and profoundly deserved, a poetic justice that left him with nothing but the bitter taste of his own hubris. Orion often sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, a serene contentment settling over him, a quiet peace in his heart. He had found his answer. The world was indeed a complex tapestry of hypocrisy and kindness, of superficiality and profound depth, of darkness and light. But it was in the darkest threads, when all the masks were off and the stakes were truly personal, when individuals were stripped of their outward trappings, that the finest, strongest threads of human character revealed themselves. He had set out to test humanity, to probe its deepest nature, and in doing so, he had reaffirmed his faith that while evil might parade in polished suits and confident smiles, goodness, in its quiet, unassuming way, would always find its deserved reward, its moment to shine. For true worth, like true light, is never diminished by the shadows, but rather, shines brightest within them, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. If you were moved by General Maxwell's incredible story of resilience and the unexpected consequences of judgment, you'll find many more powerful tales of justice, revelation, and hidden heroes right here on our channel. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next story of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. What did you think of Prosecutor Vance's ultimate downfall? Do you believe General Maxwell's test was fair? And what act of kindness, no matter how small, do you think can make the biggest difference in someone's life? Share your thoughts and predictions in the comments below. We love hearing from you.